I I think I'm going to mute myself so that yeah, I'm going to mute everyone. So Michael, you can unmute.
Oh yes, right. So if I'm going to, yeah. Okay, got it. Oh well, yes. Greetings to everybody. Thank you very much for coming. This is the second of what is now a three-part address on the Faustian temptation. The background is that when I first decided to do this for Soteria, I wrote to Stead, and he thought it was a good idea to give a reading on the Faustian temptation. And in something of a panic, I wrote to him shortly before the day and said, it's not going to work out. I'm going to have to divide it into two parts and just concentrate on Faust the man and Christopher Marlowe in the first part and look at Goethe in the second part. Instead said, yes, that's quite all right. And not only Goethe, but everything else to do with the Faustian temptation. Well, exactly the same thing happened this time round. The material is so large, it's so extensive, that I wrote again in panic to Stead, again a few days before, saying I'm going to have to divide the second part into two parts. So this is not, as I first announced, the second and final part. This is the second part, and there will be a third part. And in this second part, I am simply looking at Goethe and the connection with opera a little bit and continuing the Faustian temptation. Following on from the first part, some of you were here, some of you were not here. The first part looked at Johann Faust the man and the legend and Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. And this part will be looking principally, as I said, at Goethe's. I'm not well read in Goethe's Faust. Most English people are not. I have read it. It's in two parts. I have read the entire first part, second part not. It's exceedingly long. But my excuse is a little bit, or my apology, I'm concentrating on the Faustian temptation and not every aspect of the Faust legend. We looked in the first reading at the historical Faust and Marlowe's superb dramatization of the German Historia Dr. Johann Faustian, published in 1586. Today, I shall be having a cursory look at the less religious, more skeptical, and decidedly more optimistic interpretation given to the legend and the temptation by Goethe. To begin with, I should like to read some lines which are part of a poem published in 1819 and which will be familiar, I think, very familiar to most English speakers, written at the time that I imagine Goethe was struggling with his enormous Faust II, because 1819 was between the publication of the first part of Faust and the second part of Faust. And I believe it has a direct relevance, or more than a relevance. It's almost a rounding off of the whole vision that Goethe gave to Faust. I'm not going to say who it is immediately, but I think you will recognize the writer of these lines. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but still will keep a bower quiet for us, and a sleep full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing. Therefore, on every morrow are we wreathing a flowery hand to bind us to the earth, spite of despondence, of the inhuman dearth of noble natures, of the gloomy days, of all the unhealthy and o'er-darkened ways made for our searching. Yes, in spite of all, some shapes of beauty moves away the pall from our dark spirits, such the sun, the moon, trees old and young, sprouting a shady boom for simple sheep, and such are daffodils with the green world they live in, and clear rills that for themselves a cooling covert make against the hot season. The mid-forest brake, rich with a sprinkling of fair musk rose blooms, and such too is the grandeur of the dooms we have imagined for the mighty dead, all lovely tales that we have heard or read, an endless fountain of immortal drink pouring unto us from the heavens' brink. Of course, is the introduction to, or the first part of Endymion by John Keats. Those lines bear a certain similarity to the closing lines of Goethe's Faust. Endymion was the mortal in whom Phoebe falls in love, Phoebe the shining one, the night goddess, grandmother of Apollo and Artemis, and Phoebe, who was known as Semele by the Romans as Luna. She eventually abducts Endymion and takes him with her into everlasting life. And at the end of Goethe's Faust, Faust too seems to share a similar fate. He is accompanied into the great beyond by angels and women of great holiness. But the god who spoke with Mephistopheles at the beginning of Goethe's story seems to have withdrawn. Both Goethe and Keats can hardly be said to present an orthodox Christian pantheon. At the end of the first part of my talk on the Faustian temptation, I left you with the, in my opinion, ambiguous judgment of Marlowe on the fate of the overreaching man. For a time, a long time, there was, to my knowledge, nothing new written or said about the legendary, some even claimed apocryphal life of the German magician, charlatan, showman, physician, chemist, alchemist, Dr. Johann Faust. About 200 years lie between Marlowe and Goethe. And during those 200 years, the social order in Europe had reaffirmed itself with the support of a religious settlement. Following the exhaustions of more than a century of religious wars between Catholic and Protestant, the settlement took the form of a compromise consisting of a pragmatic absolutism in religious affairs, whereby religion was the business of the ruling class alone. Cuius regio, cuius eius religio. That had originally been laid down at the Treaty of Augsburg in 1555, but which religious fundamentalists, if I can call them that, most notably the Jesuits, had sought at great cost and ultimately vainly to overthrow. So the fate of each man and woman, including his or her religion, was to be laid down at birth according to the custom of the ruling house. Religion was now less a matter of dogma or theology than a practical cement of social order. When religious dogma was challenged, it was less now for theological reasons than for political and symbolic ones, whereby the church was perceived as being an integral part of the conservative state. The 18th century and the second half of the 17th century was characterized by lightheartedness in the face of passionate belief, and it was the time of measure, harmony, etiquette, and hierarchy. Flirting and seduction were admirable, but extreme passion was unseemly. What you thought was less important than how you said it. Appearance was all, and following fashion an essential part of that. This was the age of polished manners, emotion not as expression, but as tool. It was the time of the cult of the mask. The Faustian temptation persisted, but in a new and more ambiguous form. One was not tempted to sin so much as to step out of a very strict line. It could almost be said that the soul had been reinterpreted and refashioned as reputation. There were practical dangers in digression too. Abandonment, loss of status, of a settled abode, and not to mention sickness. The blandishments of Vanity Fair could bring many a young lady to her ruin, and a young man too, for sexually transmitted disease was rife. Inevitably, the arts of the day followed a classical model, for the classical stress on form, on the body, on outline, on good tone, in both senses of the word, harmonized with the etiquette of court and prevailing taste. Goethe wrote in Dichtung und Wahrheit that his Faust was, quote, a manifold protest against the narrowness of a church doctrine which allowed no room for nature. I shall come back to this, but I would say that I find his manifold protest in Faust less than manifold. Goethe was very drawn to science, and science provided an alternative to the irrational romanticism of the French Revolution on the one hand, and the dogma of Christianity on the other. Goethe seems himself torn between a distancing or distrust of Christianity and acknowledgement of the appropriateness of Faust, whose story, of course, began as a Christian fable, as a metaphor for the human spirit. Faust is an individualist and passionate even in his despair. He is a gambler. He is an extremist. He wants the world and more. He wants to conquer nature or return to nature. Two potentially contradictory, even incompatible urges. Faust is at the beginning of Goethe's tragedy very much a vehicle for romantic ideas. There are, I must stress, two parts to Goethe's Faust, as I've already mentioned, both extremely long, but the second part considerably longer than the first. They were written at different times of the poet's life. Faust Part One was published in 1808 and Part Two in 1832. Yes, a gap of 24 years, the very number of years which Dr. Faustus is given by Mephistopheles in Marlowe's play to live the good life in return for the small matter of his soul. The two parts of Faust are radically different. Suffice to say at this point that whereas the second part takes place, so far as it takes place anywhere, mostly in Greece, the scene of the first Faust is very much in Germany. The second Faust is about a classical temptation. The first is about a romantic temptation. Romanticism, yearning for individual and national freedom, that belief that history is molded by the powerful will, that achievement is only possible by taking risk, fearlessness in the face of death, the readiness to look death in the face, the willingness to sacrifice through giving, the willingness to risk madness, to be inspired by nature, especially nature wild and rude and perilous. This very Nordic impulse was given specific expression and definition at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century in what is called the Romantic movement. And that movement was in its habitus and its aims and beliefs inherently rebellious and foe to the pragmatic order of the European world established by the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. It comes as no surprise, therefore, to learn that in the latter part of the 18th century, the Faust legend, which had been somewhat dormant, suddenly became popular again. In 1759, Gotthold Lessing wrote the draft of his Faust, in which Faust, like Job, is the beloved of God, whom God permits to be tempted. The end of Lessing's piece is filled with Enlightenment optimism. Beelzebub, and for no reason that I can understand, Lessing replaces Mephistopheles with Beelzebub, claims his own, but he's driven back by an angel who tells the hapless Beelzebub, in lines which must owe a debt to Hamlet, the Almighty did not endow mankind with the noblest intentions to be made forever unhappy. Ewig unglücklich machen. Significantly, Lessing had intended his Faust, which he never finished, to be presented as a dream. The angel warns the demons of hell, triumph not, what you think to possess is but a phantom. So is Lessing implying that he believes that even the individual soul is just a phantom? This was the way the ancient Greeks understood it. Homer describes the spirit of the slain as fleeing, moaning to the shades. The time had passed when many accepted as a matter of course that there was a physical devil and a physical God, and a physical heaven and a physical hell. Much of Goethe's Faust, especially Faust Part Two, also reads more like the account of a dream than the account of any events which could plausibly take place in any material world that we know. Paul Weidmann created what he described as Faust, an allegorical drama, in 1775. The play is 5 acts long and concludes with, again, the salvation of Faust and with the words, Die unendliche Barmherzigkeit hat ihre Laster weit überwogen. Endless charity outweighs your vices by far. The painter Friedrich Müller, and friend of Goethe's, also began a Faust drama, of which only a fragment was published in 1778. Müller's Faust was born in Ingolstadt, which is the birthplace, incidentally, in 1748, of Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Illuminati, and if Nestor Webster and other writers is to be believed, the founder and initiator of the global conspiracy to create a new world order. Be that as it may, in Müller's Faust, God is entirely absent. But there is something of a civil war between the followers of Moloch and the followers of Lucifer. So in this Faust, there's a civil war in hell. Moloch wants humanity to continue, and Lucifer seeks to exterminate mankind. Mephistopheles enters into a wager not with God, but with Lucifer, that he will be able to win Faust over to take the expression from Star Wars, the dark side. And Mephistopheles engineers Faust's financial ruin. His instrument is a lawyer called Cnellus, who is envious of Faust's status and wealth. Cnellus employs Maschil and Isik to ruin Faust. Significantly, Müller declared himself that Faust had always been his hero. Romanticism resisted the compulsion of adapting to social mores. Its primary concern was the taking to flight, metaphorically speaking, of the bound individual. Think of Shelley's Prometheus Unbound. The free man finds God not on a cloud, however, but on earth and all around him. We are accountable only to ourselves. The American Declaration of Independence wrote life, liberty, and happiness on its banner. Temptation in Faust is not temptation to reject the strict doctrines of the church, since strict doctrines in theological terms concern neither court nor romantic rebel. Temptation is the temptation to rebel against the strictures accepted by the mass of humanity, be they social strictures or be they natural strictures. So what does the Faustian temptation become? Temptation represents an invitation to err, to break with a long association or belief or companionship. Temptation was no longer in relation to God's law, but in relation to social law and natural law. Increasingly, scientific discoveries, and Goethe was a passionate follower and participant, in fact, in scientific and zoological study, highlighted that Homo sapiens was part of nature and not apart from nature. Linnaeus classified plants and animals in an orderly way and accorded them Latin names according to scientific principles. These principles included man and classified man in the same way as any other animal, Homo sapiens. No longer is man above nature, a thing apart with a soul, which animals, church doctrine insists, do not possess. No, man is part of a greater whole. And this pantheism is at the heart of Goethe's Faust. Genesis tells us of a state of nature described as a garden uncorrupted before our first mother succumbed to the great temptation to aspire to knowledge of good and evil. This belief in the innocence of nature and the beauty of nature was an essential element in romantic thinking. Was man, after all, naturally innocent? Rousseau thought so. In that case, is the Faustian temptation intrinsically bad? For Goethe, the answer seems to me to be yes and no, or jein, as the Germans say. In one sense, yes, if it tempts us to seek to replace God or the creative force and separate ourselves from nature and then dominate nature. In another sense, no, if it tempts us to accept nature, to listen to our heart and not the blandishments of corrupt, cruel, and unnatural authority and order. The ambiguity is an integral part of Goethe's understanding and portrayal of the Faustian temptation. His Mephistopheles is not divested of charm, nor is Mephistopheles entirely distinguishable from Faust himself. Thomas Carlyle said of Goethe's Mephistopheles, "He is a cultivated personage and acquainted with the modern sciences, sneers at witchcraft and the black arts, even while employing them, and doubts most things. Nay, he half disbelieves his own existence." The Faustian temptation has changed from being the temptation to transgress God's law, as it was in Christopher Marlowe's play, to the temptation to excess, the excess of romantic passion, which may end in Dionysian devilry in Faust I and classical idealization in Faust II, which divorces us from nature. The Faustian legend is necessarily romantic, romantic in the original sense of the word at least, that is, telling a story or a fable, and romantic too, I think, in being a legendary account of the passionate soul crying for release from confinement. Goethe's Faust Part One, not Part Two, presents the romantic temptation. Faust, in the name of love, overthrows all consideration of decorum and abstemiousness. He is immoderate and selfish. This is the romantic excess as Goethe saw it, an excess which bore such deadly fruit as the French Revolution, which Goethe, even during the romantic phase of his youth, never condoned. There is little of God in Goethe's Faust, much of religion. Gone are the comforting and admonishing angels of Marlowe's Faustus. The church offers no comfort, quite the contrary. Marguerite, the pious virgin seduced by Faust, is mocked by demons, even outrageously, in the church where she is trying to pray. Faust too almost entirely abandons the Christian narrative. In 1771, when Goethe was beginning his magnum opus, he was turning away from his Christian faith. A name which is wholly absent, so far as I can see, I stand to be corrected if that's wrong, from Goethe's Faust II, and named I've only found once in Faust I, is the name of Jesus Christ. Faust Part 1 and 2, and despite the debt to Marlowe, are epics, not plays. Faust is called a tragedy. Goethe began Faust Part 1 in 1771 or 1772 and finished Faust Part 2 in 1831. The respective publication dates of 1806 and 1831, as I have said, coincidentally are close to 24 years, the time granted to Faust in Marlowe's play by his tempter to enjoy life in exchange for his soul. Many people have noted how deeply in Goethe's masterpiece Faust, Faust and Mephistopheles are two parts of one divided psyche. There is indeed another legend running parallel to the Faust legend in Goethe's work, namely that of the doppelganger. Sometimes it's not clear who is tempting whom, and at the hilarious finale to Faust II, Mephistopheles himself falls to a ludicrous, if not embarrassing, temptation, having become intoxicated with the fumes of burning rose petals and filled with erotic craving for the lightly dressed angels who encircle him. Faust is literally a monumental work. My copy, with an 86-page preface by Ernst Beutler and published in 1940, consists of 456 pages of very small type, excluding the preface. Faust in its entirety, that is to say parts 1 and 2, has hardly ever been performed. Recently, Peter Stein purportedly stayed Faust in its entirety. I say purportedly because I can only find excerpts online in YouTube, and the time sounds almost too short for this opus. I think it was 8 hours for Faust 1 and 12 for Faust 2, something like that. Be that as it may, Faust is very long indeed, and as the critic Ben Hewitt, and doubtless many others have pointed out, it is not a play at all. It calls itself a tragedy, but epic or dream, I favor the word dream, would be a better epithet, in my opinion. Faust Part 1 continues the folk legend of the frustrated doctor who sells his soul by making a pact with Mephistopheles, a devil whom he has summoned and with whom he makes and signs the pact. Service to Faust. In my reading of Goethe, I find no mention of Marlowe's 24 years. Again, I may be wrong on that, but I couldn't find any mention of 24 years. Using his magical powers against eternal damnation thereafter. He is rejuvenated by drinking a witch's potion. The focus of the drama is on the now apparently young Faust's relation with a girl, Marguerite, whom he seduces and leads to ruin. His seduction of her ultimately brings about the death of the girl, her child, her brother, and her mother. Marguerite, despite the prediction of Mephistopheles, however, is forgiven by heaven. Mephistopheles and Faust continue on their, or Faust's life's journey, into Faust Part 2. Faust 1, after a prologue in heaven, which reads like a parody of the Book of Job, opens with Faust in a Gothic study, and to coin John Bunyan's immortal words, Faust is in the slough of despond. The frustration, references, and style immediately recall the malcontent of English Elizabethan literature, and most specifically, the opening of Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. And just to remind you, read a few lines from Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. Almost I can pick any out. Here is Faustus in the slough of despond. Be I a physician, Faustus, heap up gold and be eternized for some wondrous cure. Summum bodum medicani sanitas. The end of physic is our body's health. Why, Faustus, hast thou not attained that end? Is not thy common talk sound aphorisms? Are not thy bills hung up as monuments, whereby whole cities have escaped the plague and 1,000 desperate maladies been cured? Yet art thou still but Faustus and a man. Couldst thou make men to live eternally, or being dead, raise them to life again, then this profession would be esteemed. Physic, farewell. That's Michael Young read that whole speech in the first part of the Faustian Temptation, and there we see Faust very frustrated. And if we go now to the German excerpt, which I hope that Stein can produce, this is the opening lines after the prologue, where Faust is in his study, very, very similar scene to Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. And there's an English version, which I attempted myself after that. But it's very difficult to translate, but I made an attempt. So if we have somebody, well, yes, Susanna, if that's all right, perhaps you can unmute Susanna and Michael York for the English version.
Oh, I think I mentioned Andre to do the first.
Oh, sorry, yeah, absolutely fine.
Everyone can just unmute him or herself to speak.
Who's reading?
Yeah.
Did you mention me?
Oh, hello, Stefan. No, it's Suzanne, I think. If you could kindly read the German, thank you.
Okay, I will try. Haben und Ach, Philosophie, Juristerei und Medizin und leider auch Theologie, durchaus studiert mit heißem Bemühen. Da stehe ich nun, ich armer Tor, und bin so klug als wie zuvor. Heiße Magister, heiße Doktor gar, und ziehe schon an die 10 Jahr herauf, herab und quer und krumm meine Schüler an der Nase herum. Und sehe, dass wir nichts wissen können. Das will mir schier das Herz verbrennen. Zwar bin ich gescheiter als all die Laffen, Doktoren, Magister, Schreiber und Pfaffen. Mich plagen keine Skrupel noch Zweifel, fürchte mich weder vor Hölle noch Teufel. Dafür ist mir auch alle Freud entrissen. Bilde mir nicht ein, was rechts zu wissen. Bilde mir nicht ein, ich könnte was lehren, die Menschen zu bessern und zu bekehren.
I have studied philosophy, jurisprudence, medicine, and theology too. Unfortunately, through and through with eagerness, ending up here, poor fool that I am, not a jot brighter than before. They call me Master of Arts and even Doctor. Now the fact is, I have led my students 10 years by the nose, up and down and cross and bent, to finally see we cannot know a thing. That fact burns me to the quick. To be sure, I'm sharper than his nibs. The doctors, masters, scribes, and gospel grinders, no scruple plagues me, and no doubt. I fear neither hell nor devil. Small comfort, for in return, all joy is torn from me. I cannot imagine what is right to know. I cannot imagine that I could teach to improve people and to convert them.
Yeah, thank you very much, both of you. Excellent. So in due course, succumbing to the temptation bred of frustrated ambition to know more, brooding on his lack of knowledge in spite of all his knowledge, Faust takes to conjury, or more specifically, conjuration. At his first attempt, Faust fails to summon Mephistopheles. Marlowe's first attempt was also frustrated the doctor, and in Marlowe's Faustus, you may recall, a devil appears and is dismissed with the lapidary comment, I charge thee to return and change thy shape. Thou art too ugly to attend on me. Go and return an old Franciscan friar. That holy shape becomes a devil best. In Goethe's Faust, it is not an anonymous devil who first appears to Faust, but an Erdgeist, an earth spirit. It's wholly unclear to me what place this Erdgeist has in any theological or religious order. And it is a foretaste of the confusing panorama that is Faust II. Here is the scene in which the Erdgeist, which by Goethe's standards, by the way, this scene is extremely short, appears. His speculations, Faust's speculations, are interrupted, or his discourse with the Erdgeist is interrupted by his famulus Wagner, who was also a character in Marlowe's Faustus, so Goethe's taken over Wagner. And he is also Wagner to appear in Faust 2 as the creator of a test tube baby. But here plays something of the role of Igor to Faust's Frankenstein. So here's the scene with the Erdgeist. We just need Faust and the Erdgeist.
And I think that is Linda, and I think perhaps Michael could continue Faust.
Yeah, I don't think you have to say very much. That's most of the Erdgeist, as far as I remember.
Yeah, Linda, if you're there, you can
Sorry.
be a bit of spirit, yeah.
Yeah. Who calls me?
Michael, you're on mute, sorry.
Terrible face.
Powerfully you have drawn me to you, aspirated from my sphere, so
Horror, I cannot endure you.
with bated breath you implore to see me. Hear my voice, behold my visage. I fulfill the demands of your imploring soul. Here I am. What pitiful horror grips you, man, above men? Where is the calling of the soul? Where is the breast which makes its own world bore and cherished, with quaking joy swelled to rise like us and become spirit? Where are you, Faust? Faust, whose voice resounded, propelling yourself towards me with manifold powers, beset by my mere breath. Are you then, as you shiver now to the very marrow of your life, but a wretched writhing worm?
It is for me to give way to you, blazing form, is it? It is I, it is Faust, and I am your peer.
In the flood of life, in the hurricane of deeds, up and down I seethe, hither and thither I weave cradle and grave, an eternal sea, ever changing, weaving, life glowing. I create on time's dashing loom and work and weave the Godhead's living cloth.
You who circle round the wide world, industrious spirit, how near I feel to you.
Alike you are to the spirit that you recognize, not me.
Not you. Like whom then? I am image of the Godhead, not even like you. Someone's knocking. Curses, I know who that is, my familius. My highest joy undone, this plenitude of images marred by a prowler dry as dust.
Yes, thank you very much. And at that moment, Wagner interrupted Faust. So how does the tempter appear to Faust in Goethe's tale? The devil does not appear, as we know, if not invited. Faust encounters, strangely, a black poodle, which follows him back to his study. There, Faust's attempts to render a new German translation of St. Jerome's Bible are interrupted by the poodle. The notion of a black dog as a satanic symbol, I'm sure most of you have seen the film in which the Rottweiler represents the satanic dog in the film The Omen. So the notion of a black dog as a satanic symbol is understandable, but why a poodle? Perhaps it is a little fanciful of me, but I did think that the poodle approaches Faust. The poodle is a retrieving dog. He always has something to bring you. Goethe, personally, is said to have resigned his position at the Weimar Theatre, according to one account, because of a black poodle there called Nero, to whose presence he inexplicably objected. Nero played a leading role on the Weimar stage himself in a very successful play of the time called Der Hund des Aubry, oder Der Wald von Bondy, which is the story of a heroic dog which is witness to his master's murder and later identifies and attacks the murderer. Oh, one could take that how one will, but anyway, Goethe chose a poodle. The poodle emerges from behind the oven in what I take to be Goethe's parody of alchemy and appears as Mephistopheles, attired not as a friar, but as an elegant and fashionable aristocrat. Faust declares, das ist des Pudels Kern. That's the core of the poodle, which is a German idiom even to this day and means something like, that's the essential point. That's where it's really at. It's the core of the matter. Mephistopheles' seduction of Faust is long and extremely sophisticated. And here is a short excerpt from the second encounter between Faust and Mephistopheles. So we have three people.
Yeah, I think we have Debbie as the choir. I think Michael as Faust. Who would you like to play Mephistopheles? I mean,
well, would someone like to play Mephistopheles?
I think a gentleman, maybe Stefan, Eric, or Mick. Do we? Any of you volunteer?
We'll ask at once. Well, give Stefan has got.
Yeah, Stefan. Yeah, Stefan. Would you like to?
I'll take Mephistopheles then.
Yeah,
well
you
done.
have that slightly sort of sinister, if I may say so. Sort of like,
Yeah. Many people say that I'm sinister.
Ah. then that's the perfect role.
Especially leftists.
Right.
Knocking, come in. Who has come to further plague me?
You know me.
Come in then.
You must say it thrice. I remember.
Well then, come in.
That way you please me. I hope we shall get along together well. Drive away dull care. I'm dressed as a nobleman, as you see, in a scarlet gold-trimmed coat, in a little silk-lined cloak, a clockerel feather to my hat, with a long pointed dagger, and I advise you to be brief and frank, to don what I done, so that footloose free, you can experience that life can be, what life can be.
In any dress, I am sure to feel the agony of earth's confining life. I'm too old only to juggle and play, too young to put aside each and every wish. What can the world grant me? Do without it. You should do without it. The unending sing-song ringing in the ears of everyone, the song that all our life sings itself hoarse to us in every waking hour. When I wake in the morning, then with shock, I would cry bitter tears to see how each passing day fails to fulfill any of my wishes, not one, which temperates the very conception of each joy with its stubborn cavilling, the creation of my own heart. It hinders with the grimace of life thousandfold. Then, when night falls, I stretch out, fearful, on the bed, and even there no rest is given me. I am appalled by wild dreams. The God who lives inside my heart can rouse in the depth my innermost self. The one enthroned above my every strength can affect the world outside me. And so my desire, and so my being is a burden to me. Death's desired, life despised.
And yet death is never an entirely welcomed guest.
Blessed the one who in the glow of victory is crowned with bloodstained laurels, for he, after a frenzied dance, finds himself in the arms of a girl. Then would I sink before the higher spiritual power, enraptured and inanimate.
And yet someone in that night declined to drink a brown juice.
It seems that you delight in spying.
I'm not all-knowing, but I'm aware of much.
When out of the terrible tumults, a sweet familiar tone drew me on, bore what remained of childlike feelings with the resonance of another time. So I curse whatever weaves itself around the soul by bait and trickery, banishes it into the cave of sorrows with dazzling, flattering craft. Cursed be the high conceit with which the spirit entraps itself. Cursed the blinding appearance which imposes itself upon our senses. Cursed what deceives and flatters in our dreaming of name, the illusion that we defeat oblivion. Cursed be possession's flattery in the name of wife and child, servant, plow. Cursed be Mammon when he drives us on to bold deeds and to win treasures when he straightens out our bed's bolster, to let us revel in our leisure. Cursed be the bomb juice of the grape. Cursed be love's highest veneration. Cursed be hope. Cursed be faith. And above all this, cursed be patience.
Alas, alas, you have destroyed her, the beautiful world, with a mighty fist. She topples, she falls apart. A demigod has shattered her. We carry the shards into the void and lament for all that is beautiful and lost. Stronger the sons of earth, more splendid, build up again, build in your heart. Life's new story begin with senses light and new songs resounding out of it.
The little folk of mine, hark how they urge to space and to deeds, into the wide world, out of your solitude, which slows the senses of our blood. They want to lure you. Stop indulging in your brooding. That like a vulture knows at your life, the worst company will let you sense that you are a man among men. Not that I intend to thrust you into the mom. I am know his nibs, but if you will link up with me, wend your way through life, I shall happily agree to serve you from the world go. I am your traveling companion, and if it suits you, I'm your servant, I'm your vassal.
And what must I do in return?
You will be given notice of that in due course.
Oh, no, you don't. The devil looks to his own. God knows, commits himself lightly to nothing, which is useful to another. So explain the conditions clearly. Servants like you bring danger into any master's house.
I undertake to be your servant here, not stop or rest at your beck and call. When we find ourselves together on the other side, you will do as much for me.
The other side does not interest me greatly. First, smash this world to smithereens. The other may arise thereafter. My source of joy is here on earth, and this sun shines on my suffering. If I must part from them tomorrow, once I can break from them. Then may happen what will and can be. Let me hear no more of it, whether thereafter there is hate and love, and whether in those spheres as well there be an above, there be a below.
If you see it like that, you can dare it. Commit yourself. Today, you will be joyful witness to my skills. I shall give you what no man has seen.
Poor devil, what do you mean to give? Was a human spirit in its highest striving been grasped by the likes of you? Have you food which does not satiate? Have you red gold, restless, like to quicksilver running through your hand? A game in which there is no winner ever? A girl in my very arms whose glances beckon to my neighbor, and the divine joy of honor which vanishes like a meteor? Show me the fruit which spoils before it is broken, and trees which grown green again on every day.
Such tasks hold me not in awe. With such treasures I can serve you. But my good friend, a time does come now when we care to eat well in peace.
If ever I come to lie in ease upon a bed of sloth, then it will be all up with me. If you can mislead me by some flattery, to be pleasing to myself, self-fulfilling, if you can cozen me with self-indulgence, that be my last day. There's my wager.
You are on.
In one fell swoop, would I say, at any moment, Terry, you are lovely, then cast me in fetters. Then I'll be happy to be ruined. Then let the bell toll. Then are you released from service. Then the hour may stay still. The finger of the clock fall off, but my time will be past.
Think carefully. We shall not forget.
You have every right in that. I have not been impious or imprudent. If I so proceed, will I be held in bond to you, yours, to whomsoever.
This very day at the honorary banquet, I'll do my duty as your servant. Just one thing, for the sake of love and death or death, I require a few lines.
If that will satisfy you quite, then let's complete the masquerade.
Blood is a very special juice.
Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, excellent. Very, very good.
Yeah. Thank you.
There are scenes from Faust available on the internet, not very much surprisingly few. Here is a scene, and it's the scene in German, which we've just read from the well-known version, probably the best notion, with Faust played by Will Quadflieg and Mephistopheles by Gustav Gründgens. The production, I say, in my opinion, is extremely lackluster. The costumes and stage scenery are appallingly dowdy, but Gustav Gründgens' performance is remarkable, and this excerpt will give you an impression of the richness and sophistication of the original language, and perhaps suggest why it might be hard to translate. This is a scene we have just read, and you will probably notice it has been cut, and it's even cut the choir of spirits. I think those spirits, or that spirit voice, is important because Goethe is implying, it seems to me, that joy in life might well be the devil's domain. For the little spirits of joy in the extract just read, and it seems to be a very harmless kind of joy, are paradoxically claimed by Mephistopheles as his own. So I think that particular cut from the scene we're going to read is very, very bad. It does raise the question, when the religiously committed denounce decadence and sin, especially the decadence and sinfulness of what many social critics rather sweepingly refer to as materialism, is it they or the promoters of a hedonistic lifestyle who are closest to the devil's wish that the world become a wasteland? My provocative question is that, in my opinion, it is something not easily answered, and it is the great strength of Goethe's Faust that such a question arises there. So here we have the scene in German, which if you're able, Stead, you probably are, because you're very good with this, to link to the YouTube. And yeah, this is the scene we just read. Here's in German. I can't hear it at the moment. Stead? I can't hear it. Can people hear it?
We can't hear.
We can't hear, Stead.
Oh, okay. So, right.
Das ist der ewige Gesang, der jedem an die Ohren klingt, denn unser ganzes Leben lang uns heiser jede Stunde singt. Und so ist mir das Dasein eine Last, der Tod erwünscht, das Leben mir verhasst.
Und doch ist nie der Tod ein ganz willkommener Gast.
Wo wär ich vor des hohen Geistes Kraft entzückt, entseelt dahingesungen.
Und doch hat jemand einen braunen Saft in jeder Nacht nicht ausgetrunken.
Bei Spionieren scheint es deine Lust.
Allwissend bin ich nicht. Doch viel ist mir bewusst.
Wenn aus dem schrecklichen Gewühle ein süß bekannter Ton mich zog, den Rest von kindlichem Gefühle mit Anklang froher Zeit betrog, so fluch ich allem, was die Seele mit Lock- und Gaukelwerk umspannt und sie in diese Trauerhöhle durch Blend- und Schmeichelkräfte band. Fluch sei dem Balsamsaft der Trauben, Fluch jener höchsten Liebeshuld, Fluch seiner Hoffnung, Fluch dem Glauben und Fluch vor allem der Geduld.
Hör auf, mit deinem Gram zu spielen! Wer wie ein Geier dir am Leben frisst, die schlechteste Gesellschaft lässt dich fühlen, dass du ein Mensch mit Menschen bist. Doch so ist nicht gemeint, dich unter das Pack zu stoßen. Ich bin keiner von den Großen. Doch willst du mit mir vereint deine Schritte durchs Leben nehmen, so will ich mich gern bequemen, dein zu sein auf der Stelle. Ich bin dein Geselle. Und mach ich dir's recht, bin ich dein Diener, bin dein Knecht.
Und was soll ich dagegen dir erfüllen?
Dazu hast du noch eine lange Frist.
Nein, nein, der Teufel ist ein Egoist und tut nicht leicht um Gottes Willen, was einem anderen nützlich ist. Sprich die Bedingungen deutlich aus. Ein solcher Diener bringt Gefahr ins Haus.
Ich will mich hier zu deinem Dienst verbinden, auf deinen Wink nicht rasten und nicht ruhen. Wenn wir uns drüben wiederfinden, so sollst du mir das Gleiche tun.
Das drüben kann mich wenig kümmern. Schlägst es diese Welt zu Trümmern, Die andere mag danach entstehen. Aus dieser Erde quillen meine Freuden. Und diese Sonne scheint in meine Leiden. Kann ich mich jetzt von ihnen scheiden, dann mag was will und kann geschehen.
In diesem Sinne kannst du's wagen. Verbinde dich. Du sollst in diesen Tagen mit Freuden meine Künste sehen. Ich gebe dir, was noch kein Mensch gesehen.
Was willst du, armer Teufel, geben? Ward eines Menschen Geist in seinem hohen Streben von deinesgleichen je gefasst? Du hast Speise, die nicht sättigt. Hast du rotes Gold, das ohne Rast Quecksilber gleich mir in der Hand zerrinnt? Ein Spiel, bei dem man nie gewinnt? Zeig mir die Frucht, die fault, ehe man sie bricht. Und Bäume, die sich täglich neu begrünen.
Ein solcher Auftrag schreckt mich nicht. Mit solchen Schätzen kann ich dienen. Doch, guter Freund, die Zeit kommt auch heran, wo wir was Guts in Ruhe schmausen mögen.
Werd ich beruhigt je mich auf ein Faulbett legen, so sei es gleich um mich getan. Kannst du mich schmeichelnd je belügen, dass ich mir selbst gefallen mag? Kannst du mich mit Genuss betrügen? Das sei für mich der letzte Tag, die Wette biete ich.
Hopp!
Und Schlag auf Schlag werde ich zum Augenblicke sagen, verweile doch, du bist so schön. Dann magst du mich in Fesseln schlagen, dann will ich gern zugrunde gehen. Dann mag die Totenglocke schallen, dann bist du deines Dienstes frei. Die Uhr mag stehen, der Zeiger fallen. Es sei die Zeit für mich vorbei.
Bedenk es wohl. Wir werden's nicht vergessen.
Dazu hast du ein volles Recht. Ich habe mich nicht freventlich vermessen. Wie ich bahre, bin ich Knecht. Ob dein, was frage ich oder wessen?
Ich werde heute gleich beim Doktorschmaus als Diener meine Pflicht erfüllen. Nur eins. Um Lebens- oder Sterbenswillen bitte ich mir ein paar Zeilen aus.
Auch was Geschriebenes forderst du, Pedant? Hast du noch keinen Mann, nicht Manneswort gekannt? Was willst du, böser Geist, von mir? Erz, Marmor, Pergament, Papier? Soll ich mit Griffel, Meißel, Feder schreiben? Ich gebe jede Wahl dir frei.
Wie magst du deine Rednerei nur gleich so hitzig übertreiben? Ist doch ein jedes Blättchen gut. Du unterzeichnest dich mit einem Tröpfchen Blut.
Wenn dies dir völlig Genüge tut, so mag es bei der Fratze bleiben.
Blut ist ein ganz besonderer Saft.
Nur keine Furcht, dass ich dies Bündnis breche. Das Streben meiner ganzen Kraft ist gerade das, was ich verspreche. Stürzen wir uns in das Rauschen der Zeit, ins Rollen der Begebenheit. Da mag denn Schmerz und Genuss gelingen und Verdruss miteinander wechseln, wie es kann. Nur rastlos betätigt sich der Mann.
Euch ist kein Maßenziel gesetzt. Beliebt's euch überall zu naschen, im Fliehen etwas zu erhaschen, bekommt euch wohl, was euch ergetzt. Nur greift mir zu und seid nicht blöde.
Du hörst ja, von Freude ist nicht die Rede. Dem Taumel weihe ich mich, dem schmerzlichsten Genuss, verliebtem Hass, erquickendem Verdruss. Mein Busen, der vom Wissensdrang geheilt ist, soll keinen Schmerzen künftig sich verschließen. Und was der ganzen Mensch...
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, that's all right. It's very enjoyable. We could have gone on reading it, but probably don't want to take people to evening dinner time.
Bruno Ganz is better.
Anyway, yeah, thank you for that. So Goethe's Faust is, as I said, considerably longer than Marlowe's Faustus, not only because Marlowe was writing for an afternoon's theatrical entertainment, which was not Goethe's aim at all, but for two other important reasons. One reason is that Goethe's work engages in intense philosophical and intellectual speculation, necessarily time-consuming. And the other reason is that Goethe depicts and extensively develops what we call today a love interest. Marguerite in Faust I and Helen of Troy in Faust II play very important roles in the story. Indeed, they are crucial. Marguerite is the temptation to excess of the romantic, and Helen is the temptation to excess of the classicist. In Marlowe, Faust's request for a wife, you may remember, ends with the devil offering him, quote, a hot whore. Helen certainly appears in Dr. Faustus and inspires Marlowe's doctor with the well-known lines, perhaps the best-known lines of Marlowe. Is this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burned the topless towers of Ilium? Sweet Helen, make me immortal with a kiss. However, being an illusion summed up by Mephistopheles, Helen of Troy says in Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, not one word. So women have little to do and less to say in Marlowe's Faustus. It's very different in Goethe's Faust. Goethe's Faust Part One, unlike Faust II, inspired many musical compositions. Among those still regularly performed is Gounod's Faust, Berlioz's La Damnation de Faust, and Boito's Mephistopheles. Boito's is the only operatic interpretation of Faust, so far as I'm aware, which includes anything at all of Faust II. Gounod's opera is based on Michel Carré's Faust et Marguerite, itself based on Goethe's Faust, and stresses the Don Juanism of Faust. We return here to the Christian core of the original legend. There is nothing of heathenism in the opera. We are moving away from the heathenism of Goethe and also away from his optimism. There is a case for arguing that the operatic interpretations, or most of them, return to the dark puritanical Christianity of the original legend. In Goethe's Faust, which abounds ultimately with optimism, everyone is saved, including extraordinarily Mephistopheles himself. Because the several opera versions of Faust deal only with Faust I, it is only Margarita who is undeniably saved, and we do not know what would happen to Mephistopheles. The operatic versions understandably dispense with Goethe's philosophical speculations, and Faust's fate is unclear. The last words of Goethe's Faust I contain words of hope for Faust, the voice of Margarita calling out to him as she dies, Heinrich, Heinrich. In Carré's libretto for Gounod's opera, her last words to Faust are very different. She recoils from Faust in horror and she curses him. And her last words in Gounod's opera are, Pourquoi ces mains rouges du sang? Va! Why those hands red with blood? Go. Gounod's opera ends with a chorus of angels singing that Christ has risen. It is not an exaggeration to point to a 19th century reaction to 18th century optimism and pantheism. I own a recording on long-playing vinyl record with Boris Christoph as Mephistopheles and Nicholas Gedai as Faust from the Vienna State Opera 1985. And sorry, it's Faust, but it's not online. The version we have here on the YouTube is the Vienna State Opera of 1985. It has the advantage that it provides English subtitles on the screen. And we can play here the scene where Faust, who cannot quite bring himself to commit suicide, and that is definitely in Goethe, denounces life and calls up Satan. The scene we've seen, he curses life in front of Mephistopheles. In the operatic version, his cursing of life in itself conjures up the devil. And the devil is rather more sinister, in my opinion, than in Goethe's Faust. Mephistopheles appears dressed, as in Faust, as a Don Juan figure and with the promise of rejuvenation. And in both French operas and in Buito, the sexual rejuvenation element is much more predominant than in Goethe. In this and another version I've seen, Mephistopheles sums up a vision of femininity in which the eternally female is decidedly sinister, mechanical, perhaps a doll. And it recalls a tale by E.T. Hoffmann, I can't remember the name of it, in which the hero falls in love with a woman who turns out at the end of the tale horribly to be a mechanical doll. Here is the scene in Gounod's Faust from the Vienna State Opera, where Faust is induced by the promise of retrieved youth to sign the pact, my soul against youth and fun. The devil is much more blatantly a seducer than in Goethe, and the erotic element predominates in what Faust hopes to get out of the deal. So you can see this. I don't know how familiar people are with Gounod's Faust, but it's definitely worth seeing. It's a superb opera.
Right.
No.
Right, hang on, sorry. Well,
yep.
Let's have a look. Sorry, there's some sort of issue here with yeah.
There are always technical issues.
Yeah,
sorry, you have far fewer than I do.
Right, let's try this again. Okay.
It's nice to see, Stead, but if you can't find it,
no, let's try. Sorry, I went out.
that's it. That looks like it.
I don't know what happened there.
No, that's the wrong one.
This is Gounod.
No, it isn't. I don't think it is it?
Yeah, Gounod.
It is. Sorry, I'm wrong. Yeah, it is.
Right.
If it's Gounod, it is.
I'll play. Let's just check on sharing. Yeah, sharing computer sound. I'll.
Pour moi, le rendre à tes amours, la la jeunesse et la foi.
Ta surprise et ceci pas mise à ta guise, l'épée au côté, la plume au chapeau, l'escarcelle bleue, un riche manteau sur l'épaule, un smoke, un vrai gentilhomme. Eh bien, docteur, que me veux-tu? Voyons, parle, ai-je peur? Oh, toute de ma puissance, peut-être, mais là donc à l'épreuve. Attends! Et c'est là ta reconnaissance. Apprends-moi qu'avec ça, l'on envoie user d'autres sortes et qu'il n'ait pas besoin de la peine de si loin pour le mettre ensuite à la porte. Et que veux-tu pour moi? Tout! Dis-moi d'abord ce que tu veux. Est-ce que l'or, de la richesse? Oh, je vois tous les pas te blesse. Tu veux et la gloire, la puissance. Je veux un trésor qui le contient tous. La jeunesse, amant de plaisir, de jeune maîtresse, amant de caresse, amant de plaisir, amant de plaisir, de façon puissante, il a forcé des peines au sens, pour toute jeunesse, amant de plaisir, amant de caresse, amant de plaisir, amant de caresse. Oh le bien, je t'ai contenté ton café.
My goodness, I've forgotten how good that is, and what a, in my opinion, superb opera that is. I really shocked sometimes when I read rather condescending comments on that opera. I personally love that opera. I just forgotten I hadn't seen that scene for a while. My goodness. So much nearer to Goethe's original text, although that clearly does take a lot from Goethe's original text, is Arrigo Boito's own libretto for his opera Mephistopheles. Boito translated Tristan and Isolde into Italian and provided the Italian libretto for Verdi's Otello and Faccio's Amleto. And this is another, in my opinion, hugely underestimated opera. Many people indeed haven't even heard of it. Here from a San Francisco production with a Mephistopheles sung by, I'm sure about my pronunciation here, Chlada Abrazakov, and Faust by Ramon Vargas, is the scene where Mephistopheles introduces himself to Faust as the spirit of destruction and desolation. However, the devil does not appear in the form of a poodle as in Goethe, nor directly as a gentleman as in Gounod, but we are back to Christopher Marlowe's Wandering Friar. The legend continues to our day. You only have to think of the sinister hood worn by the Chancellor in Star Wars, which was taken, by the way, from a Stalinist propaganda film called Alexander Nevsky, with music by Prokofiev, in which the German robber barons are accompanied by a most sinister cowled monk, exactly like the Star Wars Chancellor. Boito places great stress on the nature of the devil and evil, and indeed he chose to name his opera, as indeed Gounod did, after Mephistopheles and not after Faust. Gounod's called Faust, but French people refer to it as Mephistopheles, and I think Gounod originally intended it to have that title, but changed. We have the lines, son lo spirito che negra sempre, which is in the Italian libretto immediately recognizable as a translation of Goethe's famous Ich bin der Geist, der stets verneint. I am the spirit which ever negates. And here is Mephistopheles, a signature word, no. And he whistles with derision at all creation, whistles and whistles, not a merry tune, but the whistling of the wind through barren grass, the whistle perhaps of the wind on planet Mars, the whistle of desolation. And in this scene, I hope it's not too much to ask you to listen to two opera scenes. In this scene, Wagner and Faust see a shape. And in Goethe's Faust, they see the poodle and they say, what's that? And Wagner reassures him it's only a black poodle. Here he takes, in this version, Marlowe's monk is taken and replaces the poodle, and they're walking, and Faust says, who's that? And Wagner says, reassuring, oh, it's only a monk going home to his cloisters. And so here's the scene where, from Mephistopheles by Boito.
A che sogguardi nel crepuscolo assorto immobilmente. Vedi quel frate grigio in mezzo ai campi, vagolante laggiù. Da lungo tratto maestro avvisai, nulla di strano apparre esso. Aguzza bello sguardo, perché chiedi quel frate. È un guastante che alla cerca. le torve passioni del cuore s'assonano in placido io. Mi ferme soltanto l'amore dell'uomo, l'amore di Dio. Dai prati, ritorno e verso le vangel, mi sento tratto, ma chi sento frate, sento non tutti. Perché? Mi guardi non fa molto. Che orribile fantasma lascia dietro di me. Furia, demonio, lo spettro, sarà il mio, sulla tua razza onnipotente scelgo, di solo amore. Mi comandate! Questo era dunque il pociol del frate. Cavaliere, mi fa rider la facezia. Come ti chiami?
La domanda è nel seppellire, per tal che gli argomenti stegne del verbo e crede solo agli enti.
In voi messeri il nome ha tal virtù che rivela l'essenza. Dimmi orsù, chi sei tu dunque?
Una parte vivente di quella forza che perpetuamente per salvare fa il bene.
E che dir vuole codesto gioco di strane parole?
Lo spirito che lega sempre tutto nostro altiar, il mio ghigno e la mia vega turba gli occhi al creator. Voglio il nulla ed el creato, la ruina universal, l'atmosfera mia vital, l'atmosfera mia vital, l'atmosfera mia vital, ciò che chiamasi, ciò che chiamasi peccato, ciò che chiamasi peccato, ciò che chiamasi peccato. Questa stella vo no lungo scrivilo no andrà la sua attenzione, poco andrà la sua attenzione, poco andrà la sua attenzione, verso il sol, verso il sol, verso il sole, sulla terra, verso il sole, sulla terra, verso il sole, sulla terra, distrazione, dove venga questa sfida
What can one say? That's my candidate for the most unestimated opera that exists. I have no further words. I so underestimated that opera. So Faust Part One develops a love interest, undoubtedly biographical, and that love interest is the core of the narrative. Any biographer of Goethe has to pay attention to a large number of ladies who played a sentimental role in the poet's life, causing infatuation, desire, and despair. Caitlyn Schernkopf was the first strong love we know of in this connection. Goethe met her in 1766 when he was a 16-year-old student in Leipzig, and she, the 19-year-old innkeeper's daughter at the hostelry where he lunched. In Frankfurt, he met the pastor's daughter, Friederike Brion. He left Friederike after a year, a separation under which she suffered extremely. In the summer of 1772, he fell in love with the 23-year-old Charlotte Buff. At that time, he met her already engaged. She was already engaged to another man. She was, we are told, the inspiration of Goethe's romantic novel Die Leiden des jungen Werthers, The Sufferings of the Young Werther, and, at least in part, many believe, of Marguerite in Faust as well. Then there was Lily Schoenerman in 1775, to whom Goethe became himself engaged. She was a banker's daughter. Again, Goethe left behind him a broken heart when he left her. Then there was Anna Amalia, who was the niece of Frederick the Great and an energetic patron of the arts. She founded the Weimar Theatre and was, of all the women in Goethe's life, probably the one who was closest to being his soulmate. Charlotte von Stein is perhaps the best known of Goethe's female friends. He wrote over 1,000 letters to her. Her replies have all been lost. Charlotte was married and, so far as is known, always kept Goethe at a physically appropriate distance, while at the same time enjoying an intense emotional friendship with him. The relationship soured after Goethe finally married himself, a factory girl called Christiana Vulpius. We seem to have come full circle back to Käthchen Gretchen again. That's the German for Margarita. Goethe and his wife were largely boycotted by Weimar society for many years because of the disparity of social class between Goethe and Christiana, and what was considered akin to class treason on Goethe's part by marrying a girl who was not only of a much lower social class, but did not show any interest in the arts, literature, or for her husband's writing. I include this biographical detail because it provides a helpful background to understanding the role of temptation, distance, seduction, love, and corruption in Goethe's Faust, and how temptation and despair were plainly part of the very fabric of Goethe's own life. It's not difficult to see how Goethe is constantly torn between the romantic excess of what was called the Sturm und Drang, which is better left untranslated, but means something like storm and passion, on the one hand, and respectability, success, and abstinence on the other. In much of Faust, we do not know whether we are observers of a wild youth dreaming of the day when he will be wealthy, respectable, and powerful, or are we witnessing a respectable professor dreaming of the days when he was wild, young, and irresponsible? Perhaps the two aspects of Goethe's own being are reflected in the duality of Faust and Mephistopheles. Faust and Mephistopheles die, if die is the right word, taken up by the rapture, that's how born-again Christians would put it, more or less instantaneously. back to Faust in Faust 1. Faust seeks a wife and he falls in love with a peasant girl called Marguerite, or Gretchen, little Greta. Goethe throughout his Faust stressed how innocent, naive and young she is. Mephistopheles is able to pervert the romantic narrative so that Faust becomes the aristocratic, knowing seducer. He becomes a sort of Don Juan figure. I believe that the legend of Don Juan is itself a branch of the Faustian legend. The legend of Stone Guest, which first appeared in theatrical form in 1617 as El Balador de Sevilla Confivado de Petra, excuse my Spanish accent, the Rogue of Seville and the Stone Guest by Tirso de Molina, recounted subsequently by Molière in Don Juan, and receiving its most glorious interpretation, of course, in Mozart's Don Giovanni, all showing the Faustian temptation as the temptation to defy death and fate in the name of reckless indulgence, risk-taking and pleasure. Indulgence of the joys of here and now, displaying the complacency of a licentious aristocratic class teetering by the end of the 18th century, in France at least, on the brink of an abyss. Après moi le déluge. From de Molina to Mozart, the abyss, which was once the downway to hell, was since the thought of the eternal torment in an afterlife had begun to lose its hold, more readily understood as a downfall which would result in the tumbril and the guillotine. Was Goethe himself a selfish Don Juan and committed artist, or was he a respectable, deeply conservative lawyer and man of state? From my reading of Faust, he was something of both, and both elements can be found in that dual character, Faust Mephistopheles. The temptation of Faust Part One is away from natural Christian and domestic love and acceptance of God-given order. Faust sells his soul and immediately shows his natural goodness by falling in love with a girl coming out of church. This was written during the sweltering summer of 1772, when Goethe met Charlotte Buff, his very own Christian Gretchen. Faust, like Goethe, loves inappropriately. Age, status, and intellect make the match between Faust and Margarita disharmonious, a match which will offend decorum and decency. Margarita is a pious and innocent fatherless girl of a much lower social class. Mephistopheles is easily able to turn love into shame and tragedy by encouraging Faust to exploit the girl's innocence, enter her bedroom surreptitiously, and take his pleasure without thinking of the repercussions for the besotted girl. Indeed, Marguerite is practically a child. She is also pious, and her anxious question to Faust is, does he believe in God? Which has been known as the Gretchenfrage ever since, the little Greta question. It sounds stupid in English. I prefer to call it the Gretchenfrage. And this is the scene in the garden where Faust and Margarita are talking, and she poses the famous Gretchenfrage. So we need two people for this, just Faust and Margarita.
Yeah, I think Margarita is Edith, and if Michael would please his role, right? Let's screen share.
Promise me, Heinrich.
What I can.
Tell me what you think of religion. You are a dear good man, but you don't think much of it, do you?
Leave that, child. You sense that I am kind to you. For what I love, I would give body and blood. I don't want to rob anyone of their feelings and their church.
That's not right. We must have faith.
Must we?
If I could only show you. You don't even respect the Holy Sacrament.
I respect it.
But without wanting it. It has been years since you went to confession or to Mass. Do you believe in God?
My darling, who dare say I believe in God? If you ask priest or sage, their answer seems a mockery of the one who asks.
So you don't believe?
Do not misunderstand me, Angel Eyes. Who dares name him, or who dares affirm, I believe in him? Who has feeling and subdues himself to say, I don't believe? The all-comprehending, the all-supporter and keeper, does he not embrace and hold you, me, himself? Do not the heavens arch above us? Does not earth lie here beneath our feet? And do the eternal stars not rise and look down upon us with friendly eyes? Do I not look into your eyes? And do not all things press onto your head and to your heart, and weave an eternal mystery, visibly, invisibly, besides you? Fill your heart from it. It is so vast. And when you are blessed in your feeling, call it then what you will. Call it happiness, heart, love, God. I have no name for it. Feeling is all. Names are smoke and mirrors obscuring the radiance of heaven.
That's all well and good. The pastor says much the same, albeit with slightly different words.
In every place, people say something similar in the lifelong day, each in its own way. So why not I in my way?
Listening to you, it sounds fine, yet something still seems wrong to me, for you have no Christianity.
Dear child.
It has long upset me to see you in certain company.
What do you mean?
That man you have at your side, to the core of my being, I hate him. All my life, I have not felt such a stab of aversion as his repulsive face evokes in me.
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of him, my little darling.
When he is here, it chills my blood. I mean well by everyone, but much as I'm longing to see you, I have a secret horror that I then see him too. And I have never thought him decent. God forgive me if I do him wrong.
It takes all types to make a world.
I'd sooner not live with his likes. Each time he shows his face at the door, he does so sneering and half ferocious. You can see he has no empathy. It's written on his brow. He has no need to love a living soul. I am so happy in your arms, so free, so won over, warm. And then his presence shuts me off inside.
I'm quite impressed by that reading, actually.
Yeah, very good.
I really am. Yeah. And yeah, that's exactly the instinct of Marguerite. And it seems to be Faust being evasive there. And the instinct of the simple person going straight to the point, the brand mark of Satan, she instinctively feels. Some time ago, when I was editor of a magazine called The Scorpion, I commissioned Stead to produce a cartoon with the Gretchenfrage as its theme. And what I thought was it would be amusing to have a panel, a television panel, where there were a conservative prelate and a progressive left-wing prelate. And they were asked various questions, which they answered in their normal, predictable political way. And then a member of the audience would ask the Gretchenfrage, and both the prelates would be similarly evasive. It seems to me sometimes in debates about religion or Islam, this is precisely also the point. The one subject they'd ever ask is, well, do you actually believe in Allah? What does he look like? Or do you believe in God? This question is almost embarrassing. It's the instinctive question. It's the Gretchen question. It's the question of the simple person. And it has to be the prime religious question, I think. So we had this slightly amusing cartoon. Well, I hope you find it amusing. And we need a number of characters.
We do. I'm going to be the host of the television program. We need the conservative cleric and the radical cleric. Mick, I mean, would you? I mean, someone's got to do this job. Would you be the radical cleric, the Reverend Smiley?
Well, sorry, when is this, mate? Now?
Yeah, coming up right now.
It'll be just come up.
I hope it's not going to be really blasphemous, is it?
No, it just is. Just see how far you can go. If you refuse to read it, I will respect you, but we'll just see how that goes.
Go on then, go on. I'd prefer to be in the conservative one, but go
on. Someone's got to, yeah. Eric, are you there, Eric? Eric, Chris, are you there? If he's not, Niels, would you like to be the conservative cleric?
You have to demute, yeah. Unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Okay. He's so Mick is going to be the Reverend Smiley, and Niels your Reverend Balsam. And now we just need 2 audience members. The first audience member to ask a question, Andre, are you there? Andre?
Yes.
Yes. Would you be the first member of the audience to ask a question? And Stefan, perhaps you would be the second member of the audience to ask a question. Great. Let's.
Okay.
Excellent. Appreciate
it's
that.
very short.
Yeah.
Oh, it's difficult to read.
Is it?
I think.
Oh, I know this, Stead. I've read it. I've actually read this in the Scorpion.
Yes.
It's sort of pulling back to me now.
Yes.
Now, can we see that, everyone?
Yeah. Yes, I can see it.
Okay, let's start. Good evening. Tonight we have a discussion of questions from the audience by two eminent clerics and a token woman. On my left, the Reverend Dave Guitar Smiley, composer of a reggae version of Jerusalem, pioneer of gay marriages, and leader of the campaign to rename the landmark of Trafalgar Square, Nelson's Column. Mandela's Column. Sorry, I'm something's going on there. And on my right, the Reverend Ernest Balsam, organizer of the issuing of free soap to working class households and inventor of the water-cooled 24-hour cricketer's box, which he launched in conjunction with the very successful Hands Off campaign. First question, please. Sorry, madam, questions from spouses of the panelists will make this just a touch too cozy. You, sir.
Does the panel think that it is about time that women were taking the sacerdotal role?
Sacerdotal role. Dave.
Well, absolutely. The church must strive to compensate for its neglecting of the dispossessed, the underprivileged, ethnic minorities, the disabled, the mentally handicapped, and of course, women. The distinctive feminine qualities must come to the fore.
Reverend Balsam?
As to the distinctive feminine qualities, when it comes to the accurate description and recreation of feelings and
sensations,
the arts and the sciences.
So I'll just go back.
Oh, that's me again. Men have always done it better, and contrary to much premature theorizing, the recent so-called emancipation of women has produced no evidence to refute this. The priest is on a par with the artist and the scientist.
Next member of the audience.
Stefan.
Do the speakers believe in God?
Not the pusillanimous, self-abasing God of the man on my left.
Dave?
Well, it depends.
I hope you like that. That was my idea. The Grecian text by Stead, I may say. I still think it's funny after how many years is that, Stead? 25 years, is it? My goodness.
Yeah, I was very embarrassed to see it again, but yeah,
you should not be embarrassed.
It did put a smile on my face. It did put a smile.
No reason to feel embarrassed. I think, on the contrary, you could feel proud of that.
Well, it sounds a little prophetic today.
Yeah, well, the Mandela's Column is actually was at that time just a satire and has sadly become almost true.
Yeah.
Anyway.
What's on?
Faust behaves like the upper class cad, like Don Juan, and Gretchen is corrupted with a box of jewels which Mephistopheles provides for Faust and which he finds in her room. Gretchen is the charming and desirable simple Venus of which Germany provides so many examples. And I suggested we put up a beautiful painting, but I think it's beautiful, by Sepp Hiltz, called Bäuerliche Venus. And it reminds me very much of Margarita, and perhaps Hiltz had the Faust legend in mind for his painting. It also suggests the unity of Faust I and Faust II, Gretchen, the peasant girl, and Helen, the classical pose. The peasant girl is in a classical pose, just as the goddess of love, with the gesture reminiscent of the Greek statue, and here united as the romantic and the classic. Thank you. Margarita is incapable of distinguishing Faust's pantheism from atheism, and his answer to the question, do you believe in God, certainly strikes me as evasive. Just as Don Juan kills the protective father, So Faust kills the protective brother, Valentine, with Mephistopheles' help, of course. Valentine recalls Laertes in Hamlet, and both language and action at times do recall Shakespeare, especially Hamlet. The Prince of Denmark, a brooding Nordic, if ever there was a deeply romantic figure for many. Faust's seduction of Gretchen ends in disaster and horror. She accidentally poisons her mother with the supposedly harmless sleeping draught supplied by Mephistopheles. Faust, assisted by Mephistopheles, who paralyzes his opponent's arm, kills Valentine in a duel. Marguerite Gretchen has a child by Faust. She kills the baby. She is arrested and condemned to death by beheading. While she is in prison, and incidentally, there is no hint that she ever attempts to disclose who the father of her baby was. So if Margarita is not the sharpest knife in the drawer, she has the heart of a saint. Be that as it may, Faust is taken by Mephistopheles to Walpurgis celebrations to forget about Gretchen and her fate, and where indeed he is fascinated by the image of Helen of Troy, and he does forget her for a time. The sorry fate of Marguerite in Faust is drawn from the writer's own experience. In 1772, Goethe was witness to the execution by beheading of a young woman called Susanna Margaretha Brandt. Not only was her name almost the same as Marguerite, but she also had a brother in the army, like Marguerite's brother Valentine. She had been seduced, become pregnant, and killed her child upon giving birth. The hapless woman may have been a victim of some early form of a date rape drug. Her seducer, a Dutch goldsmith staying in the inn where she worked as a chambermaid, plied her with wine, and she claimed that she felt so strange from drinking the wine that the devil must have had a hand in it. The doctor who examined and treated the accused was an acquaintance of Goethe. Goethe had himself successfully passed his legal exams. He was, by the way, a qualified lawyer and judge, though he practiced little in his life. And he was one of the judges who condemned Johanna Höhn, a woman in a similar case, to death. The novelist Leon Feuchtwanger made this the subject of his novel Exil, which itself was written in exile in 1940. One of Goethe's biographers, Sigrid Damm, argued that Goethe lived a double existence between the tender, sensitive, and charitable Goethe of his writing and the Goethe of discipline, social propriety, rigidity, and law in his capacity as an esteemed member of high society. Faust, having abandoned Marguerite for Walpurgisnacht and the delights of Helen of Troy, cannot free himself from his conscience, and he persuades Mephistopheles to help him free Marguerite from her cell. The plan fails because Marguerite refuses to follow Mephistopheles and will sooner die than keep company or undertake any adventure with Faust's companion. Mephistopheles cries that she is condemned. A heavenly voice cries that she is saved. A very dramatic scene, by the way, at the end of Gounod's Faust. Thus ends Faust I, with Faust carried away from the scene of horror and salvation by Mephistopheles. Odi profanum vulgus et arcio, wrote Horace. Faust is certainly aloof. Part of the temptation of Faust I is that Faust disdains to concern himself with the feelings of others, and he is tempted to enter a world in which he only has to indulge his own feelings. Those of others will not hinder him. On the other hand, Goethe's Faust falls in love with a girl of the common people. We remember that the historical Faust was regarded as one who happily mingled with crowds, did not maintain that distance which the favored considered essential for their studies and a reward of their superiority. The conflict here is between nature and learning, between impulse and convention, between nature and church. In Faust II, Faust is considerably more gregarious than the lone wolf of Faust I, and this may well have reflected developments in Goethe's own character. The complexities of Faust and his understanding of Faust's temptation is that Goethe did not proselytize. It is remarkable, for example, that Mephistopheles is given the opportunity to play the role of Enlightenment scholar, in which he dons Faust's gown. The adversary, as we know, is a master of disguise, and gives advice to an undergraduate who has not decided on his course of studies. Mephistopheles mocks the obsession with academic niceties and the remoteness of the scholar from real life. He undermines the notion that academic knowledge is superior to experience of life. The devil urges us to life, to enjoy ourselves. Is this the Faustian temptation? To enjoy ourselves? To escape from our study? To have a glass of porter in one hand and a bonny lass on the knee, as the folk song has it? This would mean that many will side with Mephistopheles, at least at that moment. It is Mephistopheles in the scene with the student, where disguised as Faust, he provides us with one of the most cited and probably most loved of all lines in Goethe. Grau, teuer Freund, ist alle Theorie, and grün des Lebens goldener Baum. Grey, dear friend, is all theory, and green is life's eternal tree. The admiring student, who is deeply impressed by the Voltairian Enlightenment wisdom of the man he mistakenly believes to be Faust, hands him what is called his Stammbuch, which can be called a book of friendship, but which also means in German a family register. And Mephistopheles writes in the Stammbuch, Eritis sicut Deus, scientes bonum et malum. That line is familiar, I'm sure, to many. It's the serpent's words to Eve in the Garden of Paradise. You will be like unto God, knowing good and evil. I have mentioned that Mephistopheles and Faust are two aspects of one person. Mephistopheles is always in disguise. He is within others. He himself is not. Man is multifarious. As Nietzsche pointed out, whereas every animal acts according to natural laws, man is das noch nicht festgestellte Tier, the animal which is not predestined to act according to given rules of nature. Man's sickness is man's greatness. Perhaps even within his temptation lies his greatness. And Faust and Mephistopheles are one to the other. Mephistopheles is Faust's doppelganger. Faust Part One is at least in part romantic, even if Goethe himself was skeptical of romanticism. After all, Goethe was the writer of Die Leiden des jungen Werthers. Faust in Part One is full of energy and ambition to break out of his confinement and experience the world again, and so he falls in love. Faust Part Two, on the other hand, is usually seen as a work of classical literature, or at least an exploration of the classical world as seen through the prism of Northern eyes. I think this view is broadly correct. In Faust I, we have the romantic temptation to excess and lack of consideration. In Faust II, we have the classical temptation of unreality, illusion, distancing, coldness, the inability to distinguish between then and now. In Faust II, which is much longer than Faust I and written much later in his life, Goethe turns away from the love drama to more intellectual themes, the temptation of science, the corruption of court, the high fantasies of Western man in terms of the magic of science, not least the desire to become like God and create artificial man in a test tube. In Faust II, we are presented with the homonuculus, man artificially created, in this case, by Faust's old servant Wagner, recalling Frankenstein. And talking of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's husband's friend Byron was himself very much a romantic Faustian figure and the author of Don Juan. Wagner, the man dismissed in the romantic Faust I as an absurd, even ridiculous pedant, has persisted in his thorough, if unimaginative, ambition, and he has succeeded in creating a human being, something which will appear much less fanciful today than it must have done in Goethe's time. Faust II begins with Faust lying like Marlowe's sloth on a sunny bank. This spring, which is with its classical themes, contrasts with the Gothic romantic and still Christian spring of Faust I. Faust lies exhausted on a sunny bank in springtime, and he is visited by Ariel, the Ariel we know from Shakespeare's Tempest. And Ariel declares, "Dann badet ihn in Tau aus Lethes Flut." Faust is bathed in the dew of the Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. It would require a talk in itself to adequately examine, and even then fleetingly, the immense work which is Faust II, so don't worry, I'm not even going to attempt it. It may be that, like Ulysses, or certainly Finnegan's Wake, it escapes much deserved critical scrutiny by being very rarely read in its entirety, even by literary critics. I have myself read perhaps a quarter of it. There are entertaining scenes. Mephistopheles is constantly out of his element in the classical world, and he says so. Faust's pursuit of a classical ideal in Helen of Troy, whom he does finally obtain in a world halfway between dream and reality, parallels the romantic dream of Faust I. But here in the classic dream of Faust II, Faust again fathers a child, by Helen this time. The child is called Euphorion. Euphorion dies. Thinking he can fly, he soars high into the air and crashes to earth. His death heralds the end of the relationship between Helen and Faust. Helen leaves for the afterlife in search of her child, leaving Faust with only her clothes, just as classicists have only the ruins of ancient Greece to comfort them. Here is an early scene in Faust 2, where Faust first sees Helen in a dumb show created by Mephistopheles, who has acquired the post of court jester in the German emperor's court. The audience is commenting on the pantomime provided by Mephistopheles. The scene recalls a dumb show in Marlowe's Faustus, in which Faustus enjoins the German emperor not to interrupt the dumb show of classical figures. The emperor does, however, try to embrace the figures, and the figures vanish. Faust reminds the emperor, "My gracious lord, you do forget yourself. They are but shadows, not substantial," which reminds us of James Shirley's play, in which it's that famous citation, the shadow, see if I can remember it, "The glories of our state and kings are shadows, not substantial things." Glories of our state and kings are shadows, not substantial things. Well, in Goethe, it is Faust who loses control. So if you've got that last scene.
Now we need, perhaps Stefan will continue the role as Mephistopheles and Michael that of Faust, and we need we need a courtier, a lady, a knight, and an astrologer. Paul, I mean, are you would you like to be the courtier as you've just arrived? Hello, Paul?
That's better.
Yeah, hello. Yeah,
I'd be delighted.
Yeah, excellent. I'm just thinking. Debbie, are you still here? Let's see who's. No, I don't think she. Edith, would you kindly be the lady?
Yeah, I think we've got 6 people, haven't we? I was looking for that.
9, I think. On 9.
Oh, 9? Really?
Yeah. Edith, if you'd be the lady. Niels, perhaps you'd be the knight. It's quite a small role. And Andre, would you be the astrologer?
Yeah, astrologer. Yes.
Okay then. Right. Right. Let's go.
It's a dreadful favor to grant a boy.
Quiet now, be still, and let the spectre do what it will.
She slips away lightly. He awakes.
He looks back as I thought.
He is dazed. A wonder has happened to him.
But it is no wonder what she sees before her.
With dignity, she turns towards him.
I see she'll soon become his teacher. Men are so foolish in that way. He really imagines that he's the first.
Let me meet her mark and be majestic.
Audacious ninny, you dare. Can you hear me? Stop, that's too much.
But you yourself created the mime, the phantom's play.
Another thing, after all that's happened, I'll call this play The Abduction of Elena.
What do you mean, abduction? Do I count for nothing here? Do I still hold the key in my hand? It led me through terror, swell and wave of solitude, here to the solid shore. Here I have a foothold. Here are realities. Here where the spirit disputes with spirits, preparing for the great dual empire. She so far, so very far, I'll make her closer yet. I shall rescue her, and she'll be doubly mine. I dare. You mothers must grant it. Who says I know her? It's not like to give her up.
What are you doing, Faust? Faust? He's laying hands on her with violence. Now the form is fading. He turns the key against the youth and then touches him. Ah, alas, so suddenly.
Well, there you go. loading yourself down with fools will in time harm the devil himself.
Thank you. And yeah, so there is some humor in Faust 2, but to me, the whole experience of Faust 2 is like reading some kind of a dream, or dare I even say it, almost like a drug trip. It's very strange and peculiar work. Say more about it than that. However, to get an overview of it, I thought the best way, because as I say, otherwise it would take another 3 hours, which I'm not going to do. I got the very famous illustrations from Franz Sims, the book which appeared with Franz Sims illustrations, and the very top stead, I think, shows Faust giving his blood for the contract. Or have you missed? No, oh, we missed that one. Well, never mind.
No, I think it's.
Well, is that the first one you've got? Because I think the first one was giving his blood, but
yes,
yes, it is.
Right,
yeah, there
right,
it is.
Right.
That's the famous one where Blut ist ein sehr besonderer Saft, and Faust is making a scratch so that he signs in his own blood with all the symbolism that entails. So that picture actually illustrates the LP which I have of Gounod's Faust with Nikolai Gedda and Boris Christoph, and it has a very Gothic quality to it.
Yeah.
Ist doch ein jedes Blättchen gut, du unterzeichnest mit einem Tröpfchen Blut. Any little paper will do, you sign with one drop of your blood. So then the next, the front cover of the illustration of the book with Simpsons having the Star of David is completely puzzling to me. I don't know if the intention was to suggest that Faust was Jewish. I have no idea. Quite intriguing, but there it is. That was the front cover. So there's the sort of introductory illustration of Faust eine Tragödie, Faust a tragedy. Yeah. And here we've got Faust, the first part, the Tragödie, erster Teil. Yeah. Here we've got the appearance of the Earth Spirit, if you remember, we read that scene. Du hast mich mächtig angezogen, an meiner Schwere langgezogen, wehe, ich ertrage dich nicht, weil ich auf und ab, wege hin und her, Geburt und Grab, ein ewiges Meer. Powerfully you've drawn me to you, aspirated from my sphere. Horror, I cannot endure you. Up and down I seethe, hither and thither I weave, cradle and grave, an eternal sea. Here's Faust with his famous Wagner commenting on Easter celebrations, and this is where in the course of their walk they're approached by the strange black poodle. The next scene, which we didn't have, is Faust falls asleep and Mephistopheles fills his mind with images. Umgaukelt ihn mit süßen Traumgestalten, versenkt ihn in ein Meer des Wahns. I ensnare him with dream figures, sink him in a sea of insanity. The next one we didn't really have time to deal with at all was the Auerbach cellar in Leipzig. The devil shows how he can sow discord among those in their cups. There was a dramatic mural apparently painted in the 19th century on the wall to the original Auerbach cellar in Leipzig. Not, as people would immediately perhaps think, destroyed in the war, destroyed in the 1920s for no good reason at all. They simply thought it was messy and destroyed it and plastered it over. So anybody who thinks that sort of cultural vandalism is something new, that will tell them that it's not. I think in 1927 they destroyed it completely. Here Faust meets Gretchen coming out of the church, but we see the sinister figure in the background. Next. It's a picture, I think, quite well suggesting a sort of a genuine affection mixed with bodily lust, and as she falls for him, and he obviously likes her, but is doesn't seem to be altogether innocent the way he likes her there, if I put it that way. She's praying here. Yes, there are a lot of these sort of chapels used to be in Germany, these outside sort of the chapels where you could pray. Don't see many these days. Yeah, this is very Don Juan sort of scene, in my opinion. Valentine here is killed by Faust in a duel abetted by Mephistopheles, who sort of pretty well paralyzes him. There's a clear connection with the Don Juan legend and of course Laertes and Hamlet. And there is something of Ophelia, I think, in Margarita. This is the Walpurgis night, the Witches Sabbath. There are two. There's one in Faust 1, which is German, where Mephistopheles feels fine. And there's a sort of classical Walpurgis night in Faust 2, where Mephistopheles might suggest, rather like the reader, is pretty confused. But this is the first one. The Witches Sabbath, an orgy reflecting the beliefs of Faust's time, and to a declining extent in Goethe's too, that women are close to nature and therefore close to earth spirits which are in league with the devil. Here, Margarita falls for Faust. She's made pregnant by Faust. She kills her baby. Here she is in prison, awaiting her execution by decapitation. This scene is one of the high points of Gounod's opera, and at the high points, it's the end of Faust 1. Yeah, this scene, Faust trying to reach up and Mephistopheles trying to pull him down, and this is the beginning of Faust, Zweiter Teil, Part 2. This is a scene early in Faust 2 showing the imperial palace with all kinds of symbolism beloved by classic and religious painters. Intelligence, I think, is crowning victory there, and fear and hope are in chains. Well, all sorts of stuff going on there, as I say. Anybody discussing Faust 2 probably needs a couple of weeks. Yeah, Mephistopheles is appointed the new jester at the emperor's court. I think one could probably make a lot of contemporary allusions there. I'll leave you to make your own about contemporary politics, but the new advisor is the jester. Society becomes less and less orderly, as we can see. Mephistopheles has persuaded humans to accept paper money, which he can produce at will. Not sure if it's in that. I think it's the next one. Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, he's holding some paper money. Yeah. Yeah, Paris, this next one, Paris and Helen of Troy are illusions conjured up by Mephistopheles. Helen of Troy is repeatedly the symbol of disillusional, illusionary, and destructive beauty in the Faust legend. You can see that Faust is about to lose control of himself and try and take hold of Helen and prevent Paris from doing so. Here's Wagner working on his test tube baby. Humankind will soon become like gods and make man in their own image. The devil is close behind the scientists. Faust has a dream that he fights in a battle to make Helen his wife, and part of the fight involves him riding on a centaur. Don't ask me why. I haven't got that far in Faust 2. The sirens cannot fail to make an appearance in Goethe's wanderings through Greek mythology, of which a significant part of Faust 2 consists. And the sirens, of course, in the Odyssey, nearly lure Odysseus and the sailors to their doom, but he blocks their ears so they don't hear the enticing music of the sirens, which lure sailors to their doom, because the sirens, of course, are singing from the rocks. This is very strange. Faust has cast the guardian of the watchtower in chains because he does not announce the arrival of Helen, so that Faust, who in this kind of dream world has become a kind of knight and is going to marry Helen, and he's unprepared for her visit, so he casts this chap in chains. This person is saved by execution, saved from execution by Faust because Helen kind of pleads for him. And Helen's delighted because this chap who's been arrested and put in chains says how beautiful she is. And because he's so flattered her, she persuades Faust to spare him. Yeah, Faust has done a lot with Helen. I mean, good heavens, they've sired a child, and all sorts of things have happened. But it seems, after all, she was an illusion. And she returns into the world of shadows in order to find her son who has died, Euphorion. Her body vanishes. Oh, that's got to be the black poodle. It has to be the black poodle. How appropriate, yes. Her body vanishes and he is left with her clothes. Halte fest, die Gottin ist nicht mehr, die du verlorst, doch göttlich ist. Hold on fast, the goddess is no more, but what you have lost is divine, says a note of hope. Helen has returned to the shades or reverted to illusion because their son, Euphorion, has, like Icarus, flown too close to the sun and he has crashed to earth. Phoikas, who is one of the 3 midnight hags of the Greeks, called, we're familiar with them, of course, from Macbeth, reveals herself to be Mephistopheles again in disguise. This is a scene between 2 armies where Halbebald and Eilebeuter are grabbing booty. Missed the point a little bit in English, but Halbebald means have soon, and Eilebeuter means something like booty in a hurry. Faust expires at a moment that he is sorry for a crime of murder carried out by Mephistopheles in his name. Faust, in this dream world, has become a lord, and he covets just rather like the biblical story of David. He covers just one thing, one small household, and Mephistopheles is commissioned or charged to persuade the people to leave, and so that Faust's lands can include this house. I think it has a view over the sea, as far as I know. Well, Mephistopheles does this, but does it in a fairly brutal way by simply burning the people alive. And Faust is actually quite angry with him and is sorry for this crime. And this just being sorry for this crime seems to save him. And as Mephistopheles tries to retrieve Faust, he's thwarted by the angels. The angels then strew rose petals on the demons and on Mephistopheles. The demons flee, but the burning of the rose petals acts as an aphrodisiac. I'm not making this up. And Mephistopheles becomes erotically drawn to the angels, who tease him in much the same way as the Rhine daughters teased Albrecht the dwarf in Wagner's Rheingold. The last scene. Yes, somebody, it doesn't say, doesn't, oh, I thought it did illustrate that, it doesn't. Somebody called Pater Profundus discloses that nature is a parable of divine love. And 3 holy women plead for Faust's soul. They are Magna Peccatrix, the great sinner. You remember she is the woman who washed Jesus's feet in Luke, I think it's Luke, yeah. And from where we have the lines, whoever has been forgiven, little loves little. And then there is Mulia Samaritana, that is the Samaritan woman, of course, from John. The time is coming when we shall worship neither on the mountain nor in Jerusalem, but in the spirit. And Maria Aegyptiaca, which is from the Acta Sanctorum, is the saint whose body was said not to putrefy. Incidentally, a Roman Catholic legend mocked famously by Dostoevsky and Brothers Karamazov. That's by the way. They plead for Faust's soul, while a spirit or a saint or an angel, I am not sure, called Una Penitentium, who was previously Gretchen, also pleads for grace and offers to lead the reborn Faust into the higher spheres of heaven. Mater Gloriosa grants her wish, and that brings us to the end of Faust with the final lines. I don't know actually if it's a Strange Tale ends with probably the most famous lines of Faust, praising the eternal feminine and proclaiming reconciliation with the certainty of mortality. Did I send that to you? I probably didn't actually, Steb, so I'll have to read it myself. I don't think I did send it. I didn't. No, I didn't. No. So I'll read it in German and then with my somewhat strange translation perhaps. Alles Vergängliche ist nur ein Gleichnis. Das Unzulängliche, hier wird's Ereignis. Das Unbeschreibliche, hier ist es getan. Das ewig Weibliche zieht uns heran. Try to render that in English. The doomed to change is but comparison. The unreachable here will come to pass. What cannot be described here will be done. The eternal feminine draws us on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And thanks everyone who's managed to stay the course for this not short disquisition across these 2 vast books.
We said 2 hours, and it's been 2 hours and a quarter, so that was very accurate in the
Yeah, thanks so much. I think everyone read extremely well. I'm always quite surprised at how well people read, having never seen what they're going to read beforehand.
I
Often
agree.
word perfect and with a very appropriate intonation, which is
was it
quite...
Edith who read Margarita?
Yeah.
Edith, I really was quite moved by that reading. I thought you completely captured the character. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, your voice had a certain innocence to it that did touch one, as Michael said.
I was trying to forget that she's probably Bianca Castafiore. Is she in the Tintin books? Does she play Margarita? She's always singing the Jewel song.
She sings the Jewel song from Faust. You're quite right. That's perfectly true.
She's
Yes.
an awful person. She's really terrible.
Oh no, she has a good heart. Don't get me onto Tintin. I have actually suggested Tintin as another subject.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But remember that she helps them when they're going to be arrested by, is it Cluj, and the hat, the captain's hat, and she says it's one of the props for one of the operas. So she has a good heart, really. She's just a little bit too powerful. Nice to see you there, Paul. From Australia. It must be the middle of the night where you are.
Well, it's about 12:30. Yeah, but we went off summer daylight time last weekend, and of course it throws you for a week or so. So I'm sorry I was late.
Right. When did you come on?
I think I came on at 11:30 here, so about an hour ago.
Oh yeah, right.
Oh, that's good. Mike, sorry, Paul. Did you?
No.
I was just going
time for one curtain call.
Obviously, we don't want to keep anyone from making a cup of tea and everything. So perhaps the discussion won't be as long as it might be. But Michael, would you? It seems to me the whole work could be reduced to the tension between the life of the spirits that one has some pull towards and the life of the body within the world of the senses.
Very much, I think, and in its different permutations, I think that is what's happening. The ambiguity is to what extent one is good or one is evil, and that I think is not settled in Goethe's Faust in the sense that it is. Even that ambiguity might be there in a different way in Marlowe, but in Goethe it becomes, if you like, unbearable. I mean, unbearable. If it is so strong, I mean, it's difficult to settle it. But evil and good, almost you have to decide for yourself to some extent what is evil and what is good.
And this is something. This is a real issue of being a human being, of deciding which direction to go. So it is a very relevant theme. Clearly, I mean, it seems to me that, as it were, we are riders upon a horse, and the horse, our lower nature, it needs to be maintained. Otherwise, we don't get anywhere. We need to look after the horse as well in order for the higher functions to flower. And this is an eternal problem of living, I think. I think everyone really deserves a break. So maybe we should a
short break of 5 minutes, and if anybody wishes to.
Yes, I don't know. How do people feel? I mean, it's or perhaps I know people will perhaps have to go. Michael from London, I think. I mean, do you have to go? I think you.
Well, yes, I will.
Yes, I mean, you did a wonderful job as Faust. Adding it to your many roles. I mean, perhaps we can when we do part 3 might be a good time for a further discussion, maybe.
Yes, perhaps it would be that. I think that was perhaps a good suggestion, because we're probably quite tired after that. There's quite a lot there. I certainly hope people enjoyed it. I just want to say, what was that comment from you, Michael? Then that, I see. I'm very bad with this technology. There are all kinds of comments in chat. Wasn't Endymion's affair, apart from that with Morpheus' use, with Selene rather than Phoebe? you're much more in your area than I wasn't. Phoebe was the moon goddess.
Phoebe was I think the mother of Selene.
Ah, okay. And okay. But I don't think Endymion was in love, I think, with Phoebe in Keats's Endymion. I'd have to look at it again.
Well, of course, he was asleep.
Yes.
Zeus allowed him to sleep with his eyes open, but we don't know how much he actually knew that was going on.
Right.
My other question was you mentioned that the operas that Faust doesn't get out of the deal, but I thought with Boito, doesn't that opera end with Mephistopheles really upset as heaven comes, and I don't know if it takes Faust, but
the end of the opera, Mephistopheles is completely frustrated.
Yes.
Yeah, it's I think it's Gounod's Faust, where it's unclear what happens to Faust, but Margarita is saved. But in both operas, Mephistopheles is frustrated.
Yeah, I think the Gounod must be closer to Goethe. I mean, ultimately, I think. Well, I don't know. I don't know.
I'm not sure about that, actually.
I don't know that opera, and it was beautiful to hear that was.
It is. There are several versions on the internet, so you can listen to. I think there are 3 versions. Yeah. It's got a superb overture, by the way.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, well chosen, and I think one does need to have an extract of some length to really customize to that other world of the opera, really to be able to enjoy it properly. I think so I think it was good to be bold enough to go for quite long extracts. So
thank you.
Anyone else with any parting comments before we all say goodbye?
Thank you. Thanks for this.
No, thanks.
I think it's important to mention instead that we've got on Wednesday
on the 20th at 7:45 there'll be a Soteria meeting for to just deciding about future topics and other matters.
If anybody wants to recommend someone or recommend themselves for that matter, or say it would be much better if it was every Tuesday at 3 o'clock in the morning, or whatever they want to suggest. Well, if you live in Australia, that would probably be an excellent time. That'll be your opportunity. Yeah, I'm afraid, Paul. I mean, that meeting would be, what time would it be in Australia? It would be 3 in the morning, wouldn't it? But also do send a mail to me if you want to suggest another time. You can do that as well.
No. This is a good time.
I think that the best kind of compromise is sometime between 12 o'clock and 2 o'clock, or 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock on Sundays. But if people strongly feel differently, I don't promise that I will change because they write to me, but I promise that I will sort of register that if enough people do that.
But we can talk about that sort of matter then, and also other future topics and things, and any suggestions about how things could be done better, which always welcome. So
what is the spread of locations? So Michael, you're in Cologne.
Yes,
I'm in London. The other Michael's in London as well. I think. Yeah, I think Edith is a bit north of where I am, and similarly Mick. Stefan is in Denmark, I think, aren't you?
Yes, and Niels Jørgen also.
Oh, and Andre's in Brussels. So
fantastic.
Yeah, we're quite widely spread out.
Nobody from America this time.
No, indeed.
It's too early.
Well, I wish everyone a really good Sunday.
I hope that was enjoyable. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Goodbye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Au revoir.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, and thanks for everyone for staying with it. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Michael.